Hi guys. So today I'm going to be reading Nancy Drew, The Hidden Staircase. That's number 2. Last time I left off, we were on chapter 3. So I'm just going to read the last part just to catch us up. An eerie feeling began to take possession of Nancy. She could almost feel the presence of a ghostly burglar on the premises. Though she tried to shake off the mood, it persisted. Finally, she told herself that it was possible the thief was still around. If so, he must be hiding. Against one wall stood a large walnut wardrobe. Helen saw Nancy gazing at it intently. She went over and whispered, "Do you think there might be someone inside?" "Who knows?" Nancy replied in a low voice. "Let's find out." She walked across the room and, taking hold of the two knobs on the double doors, opened them wide. Now we're on chapter 4, Strange Music. The anxious group stared inside the wardrobe. No one stood there. Dresses, suits, and coats hung in an orderly row. Nancy took a step forward and began separating them. Someone, she thought, might be hiding behind the clothes. The others in the room held their breaths as she made a thorough search. "No one here," she finally announced, and a sigh of relief escaped the lips of Miss Flora and Aunt Rosemary. The young sleuth said she would like to make a thorough inspection of all possible hiding places on the second floor. With Helen helping her, they went from room to room, opening wardrobe doors and looking under beds. They did not find the thief. Nancy suggested that Miss Flora and Aunt Rosemary report the theft to the police, but the older woman shook her head. Mrs. Hayes, although she agreed this might be wise, added softly, "Mother just might be mistaken. She's a little forgetful at times about where she puts things." With this possibility in mind, she and the girls looked in every drawer in the room, under the mattresses and pillows, and even in the pockets of Miss Flora's clothes. The pearl necklace was not found. Nancy suggested that she and Helen try to find out how the thief had made his entrance. Helen led the way outdoors. At once Nancy began to look for footprints. No tracks were visible on the front or back porches, or on any of the walks, which were made of finely crushed stone. "We'll look in the soft earth beneath the windows," Nancy said. "Maybe the thief climbed in." "But Aunt Rosemary said all the windows on the first floor are kept locked," Helen objected. "No doubt," Nancy said, "but I think we should look for footprints just the same." The girls went from window to window, but there was no footprints beneath any of them. Finally Nancy stopped and looked thoughtfully at the ivy on the walls. "Do you think the thief climbed up to the second floor that way?" Helen asked her. "But there'd still be footprints on the ground." Nancy said that the thief could have carried a plank with him, laid it down, and stepped from the walk to the wall of the house. Then he could have climbed up the ivy and down again, and gotten back on the walk without leaving any footprints. Once more Nancy went around the entire house, examining every bit of ivy which wound up from the foundation. Finally she said, "No, the thief didn't get in the house this way." "Well, he certainly didn't fly in," said Helen. "So how did he enter?" Nancy laughed. "If I could tell you that, I'd have the mystery half solved." She said that she would like to look around the grounds of Twin Elms. It may give us a clue as to how the thief got into the house. As they strolled along, Nancy kept a sharp lookout, but saw nothing suspicious. At last they came to a half-crumbled brick walk laid out in an interesting criss-cross pattern. "Where does the walk lead?" Nancy asked. "Well, I guess originally it went to Riverview Manor, the next property," Helen replied. "I'll show you that mansion later. The first owner was a brother of the man who built this place." Helen went on to say that Riverview Manor was a duplicate of Twin Elms Mansion. The two brothers had been inseparable companions, but their sons, who later lived there, had a violent quarrel and became lifelong enemies. Riverview Manor has been sold several times during the years, but has been vacant for a very long time. "You mean no one lives there now?" Nancy asked. As Helen nodded, she added with a laugh, "Then maybe that's the ghost's home." "In that case he really must be a ghost," said Helen lightly. There's not a piece of furniture in the house. The two girls returned to their Twin Elms mansion and reported their lack of success in picking up a clue to the intruder. Nancy, recalling that many colonial houses had secret entrances and passageways, asked Miss Flora, "Do you know of any secret entrance to your home that the thief could use?" She said no, and explained that her husband had been a rather reticent person, and had passed away when Rosemary was only a baby. "It's just possible that he knew of a secret entrance, but did not want to worry me by telling me about it," Mrs. Turnbull said. Aunt Rosemary, sensing that her mother was becoming alarmed by the questions, suggested that they all have lunch. The two girls went with her to the kitchen and helped prepare a tasty meal of chicken salad, biscuits, and fruit gelatin. During the meal, the conversation covered several subjects, but always came back to the topic of the mystery. They had just finished eating when suddenly Nancy sat straight up in her chair. "What's the matter?" Helen asked her. Nancy was staring out the dining room door toward the stairway in the hall. Then she turned to Miss Flora. "Did you leave a radio on in your bedroom?" "Why, no." "Did you, Aunt Rosemary?" "No. Neither Mother nor I turned our radios on this morning. Why do you—" She stopped speaking, for now all of them could distinctly hear music coming from the second floor. Helen and Nancy were out of their chairs instantly. They dashed into the hall and up the stairs. The music was coming from Miss Flora's room, and when the girls rushed in, they knew indeed that it was from her radio. Nancy went over to examine the set. It was an old one, and did not have a clock attachment with an automatic control. "Someone came into this room and turned on the radio," she stated. A look of alarm came over Helen's face, but she tried to shake off her nervousness and asked, "Nancy, do you think the radio could have been turned on by remote control? I've heard of such things." Nancy said she doubted this. "I'm afraid, Helen, that the thief has been in this house all of the time. He and the ghost are one and the same person. Oh, I wish we had looked before in the cellar and the attic. Maybe it's too late. Come on." Helen, instead of moving from the room, stared at the fireplace. "Nancy," she said, "do you suppose someone is hiding up there?" Without hesitation she crossed the room, got down on her knees and tried to look up the chimney. The damper was closed. Reaching her arm up, Helen pulled the handle to open it. The next moment she cried out, "Ugh!" "Oh, Helen, you poor thing!" Nancy exclaimed, running over to her friend's side. A shower of soot had come down, covering Helen's hair, her face, shoulders, and arms. "Get me a towel, will you, Nancy?" she requested. Nancy dashed to the bathroom and grabbed 2 large towels. She wrapped them around her friend, and then went with Helen to help her with the shampoo and a general clean-up job. Finally Nancy brought her another sports dress. "I guess my idea about chimneys wasn't so good," Helen stated ruefully, "and we're probably too late to catch the thief." Nevertheless, she and Nancy climbed the stairs to the attic and looked behind trunks and boxes to see if anyone were hiding. Next, the girls went to the cellar and inspected the various rooms there. Still, there was no sign of the thief who had entered Twin Elms. After Miss Flora had heard the whole story, she gave a nervous sigh. "It's the ghost. There's no other explanation." "But why," Aunt Rosemary asked, "has the ghost suddenly started performing here? This house has been occupied since 1785, and no ghost was ever reported haunting the place." "Well, apparently robbery is the motive," Nancy replied, "but why the thief bothers to frighten you is something I haven't figured out yet." "The main thing," Helen spoke up, "is to catch him." "Oh, if only we could," Miss Flora said, her voice a bit shaky. The girls were about to pick up the luncheon dishes from the table to carry them to the kitchen when the front door knocker sounded loudly. "Oh, dear," said Miss Flora, "who can that be? Maybe it's the thief, and he's come to harm us." Aunt Rosemary put an arm around her mother's shoulders. "Please don't worry," she begged. "I think our caller is probably the man who wants to buy Twin Elms." She turned to Nancy and Helen. "But Mother doesn't want to sell for the low price that he's offering." Nancy said she would go to the door. She set the dishes down and walked out to the hall. Reaching the great door, she flung it open. Nathan Gomber stood there. Chapter 5: A Puzzling Interview. For several seconds Nathan Gomber stared at Nancy in disbelief. "You?" he cried out finally. "You didn't expect to find me here, did you?" she asked coolly. "Oh, I certainly didn't. I thought you'd taken my advice and stayed with your father. Young people today are so hard-hearted." Gomber wagged his head in disgust. Nancy ignored Gomber's remarks. Shrugging, the man pushed his way into the hall. "I know this. If anything happens to your father, you'll never forgive yourself. But you can't blame Nathan Gomber. I warned you." Still, Nancy made no reply. She kept looking at him steadily, trying to figure out what was really in his mind. She was convinced it was not solicitude for her father. Nathan Gomber changed the subject abruptly. "I'd like to see Mrs. Turnbull and Mrs. Hayes," he said. "Go call them." Nancy was annoyed by Gomber's crudeness, but she turned around and went down the hall to the dining room. "We heard every word," Miss Flora said in a whisper. "I shan't see Mr. Gomber. I don't want to sell this house." Nancy was amazed to hear this. "You mean he's the person who wants to buy it?" "Yes." Instantly Nancy was on the alert. Because of the nature of the railroad deal in which Nathan Gomber was involved, she was distrustful of his motives in wanting to buy Twin Elms. It flashed through her mind that perhaps he was trying to buy it at a very low price and planned to sell it off in building lots at a huge profit. "Suppose I go tell him you don't want to sell," Nancy suggested in a low voice, but her caution was futile. Hearing footsteps behind her, she turned to see Gomber standing in the doorway. "Howdy, everyone," he said. Miss Flora, Aunt Rosemary, and Helen showed annoyance. It was plain that all of them thought the man completely lacking in good manners. Aunt Rosemary's jaw was set in a grim line, but she said politely, "Helen, this is Mr. Gomber. Mr. Gomber, my niece, Miss Corning." "Pleased to meet you," said the caller, extending a hand to shake Helen's. "Nancy, I guess you've met Mr. Gomber," Aunt Rosemary went on. "Oh, sure," Nathan Gomber said with a somewhat raucous laugh. "Nancy and me, we've met." "Only once," Nancy said pointedly. Ignoring her rebuff, he went on, "Nancy Drew is a very strange young lady. Her father is in great danger, and I tried to warn her to stick close to him. Instead of that, she's out here visiting you folks." "Her father's in danger?" Miss Flora said worriedly. "Dad says he's not," Nancy replied. "And besides, I'm sure my father would know how to take care of any enemies." She looked straight at Nathan Gomber as if to let him know that the Jews were not easily frightened. "Well," said the caller, "let's get down to business." He pulled out an envelope full of papers from his pocket. "I don't wish to sell at such a low figure," Miss Flora told him firmly. "In fact, I don't know that I want to sell at all." Nathan Gomber tossed his head. "You'll sell all right," he prophesied. "I've been talking to some of the folks downtown. Everyone knows that this old place is haunted. And no one would give you 5 cents for it. That is, nobody but me." As he waited for his words to sink in, Nancy spoke up. "If this house is haunted, why do you want it?" "Well," Gomber answered, "I guess I'm a gambler at heart. I'd be willing to put some money into this place, even if there is a ghost parading around." He laughed loudly, then went on, "I declare it might be a real pleasure to meet a ghost and get the better of it." Nancy thought with disgust. "Nathan Gomber, you're about the most conceited, obnoxious person I've ever met in a long time." Suddenly the expression of cunning on the man's face changed completely. An almost wistful look came into his eyes. He sat down on one of the dining room chairs and rested his chin in his hand. "I guess you think I'm just a hard-headed businessman with no feelings," he said. "The truth is, I'm a real softy. I'll tell you why I want this old house so bad. I've always dreamed of owning a colonial mansion and having a kinship with early America. You see, my family were poor folks in Europe. Now that I've made a little money, I'd like to have a home like this to roam around in and enjoy its traditions." Miss Flora seemed to be touched by Gomber's story. "I had no idea you wanted the place so much," she said kindly. "Maybe I ought to give it up. It really is too big for us." As Aunt Rosemary saw her mother weakening, she said quickly, "You don't have to sell this house, Mother. You know you love it. So far as the ghost is concerned, I'm sure the mystery is going to be cleared up. Then you'd be sorry you had ever parted with Twin Elms. Please don't say yes." As Gomber gave Mrs. Hayes a dark look, Nancy asked him, "Why don't you buy Riverview Manor? It's a duplicate of this place, and it is for sale. You probably could purchase it at a lower price than you could this one." "I've seen that place," the man returned. "It's in a bad state. It would cost me a mint of money to fix it up. No, sir. I want this place, and I'm going to have it." This bold remark was too much for Aunt Rosemary. Her eyes blazing, she said, "Mr. Gomber, this interview is at an end. Good-bye." To Nancy's delight and somewhat to her amusement, Nancy Gomber obeyed the order to leave. He seemed to be almost meek as he walked through the hall and let himself out the front door. "Of all the nerve!" Helen burst out. "Perhaps we shouldn't be too hard on the man," Miss Flora said timidly. "His story is a pathetic one, and I can see how he might want to pretend he had an old American family background." "I'd like to bet a cocky Mr. Gomber didn't mean one word of what he was saying," Helen remarked. There's a picture. It says, "The chandelier suddenly started to sway." Interesting. "Oh dear, I'm so confused," said Miss Flora, her voice trembling. "Let's all sit down in the parlour and talk about it a little more." The two girls stepped back as Miss Flora, then Aunt Rosemary, left the dining room. They followed to the parlour and sat down together on the recessed couch by the fireplace. Nancy, on a sudden hunch, ran to a front window to see which direction Gomber had taken. To her surprise, he was walking down the winding driveway. "That's strange. Evidently he didn't drive," Nancy told herself. "It's quite a walk into town to get a train or a bus to River Heights." As Nancy mulled over this idea, trying to figure out the answer, she became conscious of creaking sounds. Helen suddenly gave a shriek. Nancy turned quickly. "Look!" Helen cried, pointing toward the ceiling, and everyone stared upward. The crystal chandelier had suddenly started swaying from side to side. "The ghost again!" Miss Flora cried out. She looked as if she was about to faint. Nancy's eyes quickly swept the room. Nothing else in the room was moving. The vibration was not causing the chandelier to sway. As it swung back and forth, a sudden thought came to the young sleuth. Maybe someone in Miss Flora's room above was causing the shaking. "I'm going upstairs to investigate," Nancy told the others. Racing noiselessly on tiptoe out of the room and through the hall, she began climbing the stairs, hugging the wall so the steps would not creak. As she neared the top, Nancy was sure she heard a door close. Hurrying along the hall, she burst into Miss Flora's bedroom. Nobody was in sight. "Maybe this time the ghost couldn't get away and is in that wardrobe," Nancy thought. Helen and her relatives had come up the stairs behind Nancy. They reached the bedroom just as she flung open the wardrobe doors. But for the second time she found no one was hiding there. Nancy bit her lip in vexation. The ghost was clever indeed. Where had he gone? She had given him no time to come down the hall or run into another room. Yet there was no denying the fact that he had been in Miss Flora's room. "Tell us why you came up," Helen begged her. Nancy told her theory, but suddenly she realized that maybe she was letting her imagination run wild. It was possible, she admitted to the others, that no one had caused the chandelier to shake. "There's only one way to find out," she said. "I'll make a test." Nancy asked Helen to go back down to the first floor and watch the chandelier. She would try to make it sway by rocking from side to side on the floor above it. "If this works, then I'm sure we've picked up a clue to the ghost," she said hopefully. Helen readily agreed and left the room. When Nancy thought that her friend had had time to reach the parlor below, she began to rock hard from side to side on the spot above the chandelier. She had barely started the test when from the first floor Helen Corning gave a piercing scream. Chapter 6. The Gorilla Face. "Something has happened to Helen!" Aunt Rosemary cried out fearfully. Nancy was already racing through the second-floor hallway. Reaching the stairs, she leaped down them 2 steps at a time. Helen Corning had collapsed in a wing chair by the parlor, her hands over her face. "Helen, what happened?" Nancy asked, reaching her friend's side. "Out there, looking in that window." Helen pointed to the front window of the parlor next to the hall. "The most horrible face I have ever seen." "Was it a man's face?" Nancy questioned. Oh, I don't know." It looked just like a gorilla. Helen closed her eyes as if to shut out the memory of the sight. Nancy did not wait to hear any more. In another second she was at the front door and had yanked it open. Stepping inside, she looked all around. She could see no animal near the house, nor any sign under the window that one had stood there. Puzzled, the young sleuth hurried down the steps and began a search of the grounds. By this time Helen had collected her wits and come outside. She joined Nancy, and together they looked in every outbuilding and behind every clump of bushes on the grounds of Twin Elms. They did not find one footprint or any other evidence to prove that a gorilla or other creature had been on the grounds of the estate. "I saw it! I know I saw it!" Helen insisted. "I don't doubt you," Helen replied. "Then what explanation is there?" Helen demanded. "You know I never did believe in spooks, but if we had many more of these weird happenings around here, I declare I'm going to start believing in ghosts." Nancy laughed. "Don't worry, Helen," she said. "There'll be a logical explanation for the face of the window." The girls walked back to the front door of the mansion. Miss Flora and Aunt Rosemary stood there and immediately insisted upon knowing what had happened. As Helen told them, Nancy once more surveyed the outside of the window at which Helen had seen the terrifying face. "I have a theory," she spoke up. "Our ghost simply leaned across from the end of the porch and held a mask in front of the window." Nancy stretched her arm out to demonstrate how this was possible. "So that's why he didn't leave any footprints under the window," Helen said. "But he certainly got away from here fast." She suddenly laughed. "He must be on some ghost track team." Her humor, Nancy was glad to see, relieved the tense situation. She had noticed Miss Flora leaning wearily on her daughter's arm. "You better lie down and rest, Mother," Mrs. Hayes advised. "I guess I will," Aunt Flora agreed. It was suggested that the elderly woman use Aunt Rosemary's room, while the others continued the experiment with the chandelier. Helen and Aunt Rosemary went into the parlor and waited as Nancy ascended the front stairway and went to Miss Flora's bedroom. Once more she began to rock from side to side. Downstairs, Aunt Rosemary and her niece were gazing intently at the ceiling. "Look!" Helen exclaimed, and pointing to the crystal chandelier. "It's moving!" In a moment it swung to the left and then back to the right. "Nancy has proved that the ghost was up in my mother's room," Aunt Rosemary said excitedly. After a few minutes the rocking motion of the chandelier slackened and finally stopped. Nancy came hurrying down the steps. "Did it work?" she called. "Yes, it did," Aunt Rosemary replied. "Oh, Nancy, we must have two ghosts." "Why do you say that?" Helen asked. "Well, one was rocking the chandelier, the other was holding the horrible face up to the window. No one could have gone from Miss Flora's room to the front porch in such a short time. Oh, this complicates everything." "It certainly does," Nancy agreed. "The question is, are there two ghosts in cahoots, or is it possible there was only one? He could have disappeared from Miss Flora's room without our seeing him, and suddenly hurried to the first floor and let himself out the front door while we were upstairs. I'm convinced there is at least one secret entrance into this house, and maybe more. I think our next step should be to try to find it, or them." "We'd better wash the luncheon dishes first," Aunt Rosemary suggested. As she and the girls worked, they discussed the mystery, and Mrs. Hayes revealed that she had talked to her mother about leaving the house, whether or not she sold it. "I thought we might at least go away for a little vacation, but Mother refuses to leave. She says she intends to remain right here until this ghost business is settled." Helen smiled. "Nancy, my great-grandmother is a wonderful woman. She has taught me a lot about courage and perseverance. I hope if I ever reach her age, I'll have half as much." "Yes, she's an example to all of us," Aunt Rosemary concurred. Nancy nodded. "I agree. I haven't known your mother long, Aunt Rosemary, but I think she is one of the dearest persons I have ever met." "If Miss Flora won't leave," said Helen, "I guess that means we all stay." "That's settled," said Nancy with a smile. After the dishes were put away, the girls were ready to begin their search for a secret entrance into the mansion. "Let's start with Miss Flora's room," Helen suggested. "That's a logical place," Nancy replied, and took the lead up the stairway. Every inch of the wall, which was panelled in maple halfway to the ceiling, was tapped. No hollow sound came from any section of it to indicate an open space behind. The bureau, dressing table, and bed were pulled away from the walls, and Nancy carefully inspected every inch of the paneling for cracks or wide seams to indicate a concealed door. "Nothing yet," she announced, and then decided to inspect the sides of the fireplace. The paneled sides and brick front revealed nothing. Next, Nancy looked at the sides and rear of the stone interior. She could see nothing unusual, and the blackened stones did not look as if they had ever been disturbed. She closed the damper which Helen had left open, and then suggested that the searchers transfer to another room on the second floor. But no trace of any secret entrance to the mansion could be found. "I think we've had enough investigation for one day," Aunt Rosemary remarked. Nancy was about to say that she was not tired and would like to continue, but she realized that Mrs. Hayes had made the suggestion because her mother was once more showing signs of fatigue and strain. Helen, who also realized the situation, said, "Let's have an early supper. I'm starved." "I am too," Nancy replied, laughing gaily. The mood was contagious, and soon Miss Flora seemed to have forgotten about her mansion being haunted. She sat in the kitchen while Aunt Rosemary and the girls cooked the meal. Steak and fried potatoes, fresh peas, and yummy floating island for dessert," said Helen. "I can hardly wait." "Fruit cup first," Aunt Rosemary announced, taking a bowl of fruit from the refrigerator. Soon the group was seated at the table. Tactfully steering the conversation away from the mystery, Nancy asked Miss Flora to tell the group about parties and dances which had been held in the mansion long ago. The elderly woman smiled in recollection. "I remember one story my husband told me of something that had happened to him when he was a little boy," Miss Flora began. "His parents were holding a masquerade, and he was supposed to be in bed fast asleep. His nurse had gone downstairs to talk to some of the servants. The music awakened my husband, and he decided it would be great fun to join the guests. 'I'll put on a costume myself,' he said to himself. He knew there was some packed in a trunk in the attic." Miss Flora paused. "By the way, girls, I think that sometime while you are here you ought to see them. They're beautiful." Well, Everett went to the attic, opened the trunk, and searched until he found a soldier's outfit. It was very fancy. Red coat and white trousers. He had quite a struggle getting it on, and had to turn the coat sleeves way up. The knee breeches came to his ankles, and the hat was so large that it came down over his ears. By this time Miss Flora's audience was laughing, and Aunt Rosemary remarked, "My father really must have looked funny. Please go on, Mother." Little Everett came down to the stairs and mingled with the masqueraders at the dance. For a while he wasn't noticed. Then suddenly his mother discovered the queer-looking figure. "And," Aunt Rosemary interrupted, "quickly put him back to bed, I'm sure." Miss Flora laughed. "That's where you're wrong. The guests thought the whole thing was such fun that they insisted Everett stay. Some of the women danced with him. He went to dancing school, and he was an excellent dancer. Then they gave him strawberries and cream and cake," Helen remarked, "and then they put him to bed." Again Miss Flora laughed. The poor little fellow never knew that he had fallen asleep while he was eating, and his father had to carry him upstairs. He was put into his little four-poster, costume and all. Of course his nurse was horrified, and I'm afraid that during the rest of the night the poor woman thought she would lose her position, but she didn't. In fact, she stayed with the family until all of the children were grown up. "Oh, that's a wonderful story," said Nancy. She was about to urge Miss Flora to tell another story when the telephone rang. Aunt Rosemary answered it, and then called to Nancy. "It's for you." Nancy hurried to the hall and grabbed up the phone and said, "Hello." A moment later she cried out, "Dad, how wonderful to hear from you!" Mr. Drew said that he had not found Willie Wharton, and certain clues seemed to indicate that he was not in Chicago, but in some other city. "I have a few other matters to take care of that will keep me here until tomorrow night. How are you getting along?" "Oh, I haven't solved the mystery yet," his daughter reported. "We've had some more strange happenings. I'll certainly be glad to see you here at Clifford. I know you can help me." "All right, I'll come, but don't try to meet me. The time is too uncertain, and as a matter of fact I may find that I'll have to stay here in Chicago." Mr. Drew said he would come out to the mansion by taxi. Briefly, Nancy related her experiences at Twin Elms and after a little more conversation, hung up. When she rejoined the others at the table, she told them about Mr. Drew's promised visit. "Oh, I'll be so happy to meet your father," said Miss Flora. "We may need legal advice in this mystery." There was a pause after this remark, with everyone silent for a few minutes. Suddenly each one in the group looked at the other startled. From somewhere upstairs came the plaintive strains of violin music. Had the radio been turned on again by the ghost? Nancy dashed from the table to find out. And the next time I'm going to be doing Chapter 7, Frightening Eyes. So that's all for today. Bye guys. Hope you liked it.